Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now on our 51st episode of 2024. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. You know, it's a super busy time in Washington right now. The federal government will run out of funding at midnight on Friday, so not a whole lot of time. So most of the debate right now centers around the one-year farm extension and supplemental disaster payments to farmers. So while we expect to see a continuing resolution Monday afternoon, the bill text has yet to be released. The Farm Bill is going to include funding for RUS and Reconnect program. Also, the CR will be proposed to run through March 14th, giving the Congress and Trump administration time to agree on new funding levels. And it's widely expected that Congress will pass the CR and avert a partial or full government shutdown. Also, Monday, the government's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency released a draft on the National Cyber Incident Response Plan update for public comment, and those comments are due January 15th. Related, our nominee for FCC chair, Brendan Carr, said he is deeply concerned about the recently uncovered swarm of attacks on U.S. telecom companies. And so the government's warning about Chinese-sponsored attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure, including telecom. And the current FCC chair, Rosenworcel, proposed a rule earlier this month that would require telecom operators to secure their networks and maintain cybersecurity risk management plans. Also, the Supreme Court recently agreed to hear arguments on a case centering around USF, and the authority, the FCC, has to set contribution rates for telecom companies paying into USAC, which manages USF. So the issue of contributions in USF is likely to be a high priority for Congress next year. On the NTI BEAD front, Nevada announced winners of its $553 million broadband infrastructure funding. So things continue to make progress on the BEAD front. So as we enter next year, 2025, FBA will be working our way around North America with an incredible lineup of regional Fiber Connect events. We'll be in San Antonio in February, Philadelphia in March. We're going to do Fiber Day in the Hill in April. Our Fiber Connect 2025 conference will be Nashville, June 1st to 4th. We'll be in Anchorage in July, Toronto in August, Spokane in September, Scottsdale in October, Kansas City in November, and then we'll be at our premier member meeting in Palm Springs, December 8th and 9th. That brings us to today's Five for Breakfast. With our guest today is our good friend and strategic partner, Mike Render, the CEO of RVA, who's going to share with us what we all been waiting for. The 2024 deployment numbers are in. So how strong is the current and future fiber to the home market? Before I introduce today's guests, I'll introduce David Norris from team, who's going to take us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning, everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, please keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box, which is located in the upper right corner of the screen. We will host a Q&A session with Mike at the end of today's presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate the input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary to once again introduce our guest and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Dave, and good morning. Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was our good friend Blair Levin, U.S. Policy and Regulatory Advisor to New Street Research. He joined me for discussion on broadband priorities in the new administration. You know, Blair has so much history in our industry, and I always enjoy hearing his perspective and debating with him on his interpretation of the facts. So if you missed last week's session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is our good friend and strategic research partner, Mike Render, the CEO of RVA, who's going to share with us the 2024 fiber deployment numbers they're in and how strong is our current and future fiber to the home market. Mike is a recognized expert in North American fiber deployment. He's a regular presenter at national and international broadband and smart city conferences, as well as a consultant to numerous public and private organizations in the fiber optic industry. The Fiber Broadband Association, broadband communities, and many others rely on his research. RVA is nationally and internationally known for its 30-year history of service for a wide range of organizations, recently expanding research into growing fields of 5G smart city technology. Render has received numerous industry awards for his work in the broadband arena and for RVA's research influence on FCC policy and broadband community's Cornerstone Award recipient. Mike, as always, great to see you. Welcome. And for audience, please type in your questions. Go. With that, I will turn things over to Mike.
Great, very good. Next slide, we're going to get into the state of the deployment, where we are today. And first of all, next slide, just want to recap a couple things I won't be able to cover today, but you can look in other slides if you missed them earlier. We really tried to focus on this year the productivity value of a gigabit. Is a gigabit really worth it? The conclusion is yes, and there's some good reasons why. We also delved into the consumer side from consumer research on marketing and what messages really resonate and how providers can augment their message. And today, of course, we're going to focus on fiber deployment, how we're doing this year. Next slide. We can, well, the past one, yeah, just a background of what we do methodology-wise. We use a lot of different ways to get to these numbers. No data is perfectly correct, including ours, but we try to triangulate our own surveys, the public information that's out there, the government information that comes out, other industry associations, all to make sure that we're getting as close as possible to the real numbers. And of course, it's challenging today because we have so many providers out there beyond the big names we know of. Next slide. So the big news, we actually did set another record for deployment this year from 9.1 to 10.3. I'll be honest, during the year, I was a little skeptical that was going to happen because you're hearing all the news about vendors not having great sales because of what we'll talk about in a minute, the inventory glut, and also some of the large providers weren't growing a lot or even declining slightly, but a lot of growth overall when you look at the whole spectrum of people building. So you can see we've had some ups and downs through the years, hitting peaks in 2004 and 2008, but now we're at the new grand peak in 2024. Next slide. So how does that all come out? Cumulatively, we're now at 76 million unique homes passed. And if you count passings from providers that are doubling up, passing a home more than once with more than one provider, we're at 88.1 million passings. So a huge number. We had good growth in 2024, 14%, 13%. We're now at 35 million homes connected, and that's growing well, as we'll see. Take rates are holding up, as we'll see in the next slide. Next slide. So in the next slide here, we're showing take rates through the years, and you can see, they dip and so forth a little bit. Sometimes during periods of strong growth, they dip. Certainly did in 2004 when Verizon jumped in against a very small base, and it really dropped them down for a while. But even in the more current periods, not 2019 it has, but what you'll see is it's actually kind of growing, struggling to grow even during this time of growth, which means the ramp rate has to be happening quicker. The take rates are better and they're growing faster. And in fact, a lot of providers are reporting that they're getting to that first 20% take rate in a faster period of time, and they're getting to higher ultimate take rates, which may take 6 years or so, but they're getting to them faster and higher. And so we're now looking at about a 45% average take. That's a current take, all the current connections against the current passings. And, if we stop passing today, that take rate would grow, of course. Next slide. So here we're showing how we're doing against the Fiber Broadband Association goals of trying to get to 90% passed and 50% connected. Looks like we're on the right path generally. As you can see on the map on the right from the FCC data, the colors are starting to fill in terms of densely populated fiber penetration, but still a lot of room to grow, as we obviously can see. We were, 56 of households, but only about 18% of second homes, so a lot of room for growth yet. And as I think on the next slide, go ahead, next slide, we're going to talk about the addressable market. And well, first of all, let's talk about the inventory glut, actually. That has been a huge issue out there. I don't know how many times I've heard from FBA members saying, when is this glut going to occur? And as you know, most of you know here, that after a deficit of materials that happened, people started, and then COVID occurred, and everyone realized the value of the internet. All of a sudden, people were overbuying, and you can see these huge bubbles. An OSP vendor on the left and some Corning numbers that was presented on a previous fiber breakfast. But you can see the bubble that occurred against the trend line. Well, now, of course, that bubble has to work off. So you see the reverse bubble. So you see kind of a Z curve up and down and back up again. Now we're working out that inventory, and most vendors say we're on the way back up, which is good, but obviously the numbers are not back to the trend line yet. So they're still not seeing the sales they'd like to see or will see, but the trend is looking much better. On the right from our studies of smaller providers, we did a couple waves this year, and you can see the average month of inventory they estimate has been going down in that 6-month period. And of course, it varies by segment. Fiber cable still is the largest excess of inventory out there. Electronics the least. But the good news is we're almost past this period. Next slide. As I mentioned, looking at the addressable market, one thing that's interesting, there's still a lot of market left to go. It's not like we're 3 years away from finishing this job. First of all, households increase every year, and for the next decade, we've looked at a conservative 1 million household increase per year. But there's still a lot of initial passings out there, both in the dense low income area, the denser higher income areas, small towns, rural, and of course second homes. So still about 71 million homes to pass there. But beyond that, we're seeing more and more second passings as people are really realizing just how strong fiber is and how important it is. Things we've talked about in our other studies. There's no other method that has the degree of differentiation that fiber does in almost any product category. It's pretty amazing. So people are looking at competing with another fiber play in many areas. And so especially in dense middle and higher income areas, we're going to see a lot of redundant passings, but even other areas we already are and seeing some. That's more speculative, but a lot of room to grow there too. So it may be as much or more as 150 million still to go. So still plenty of room for growth, we believe. Next slide. So, HFC cable is our closest competitors. It does the best after us in terms of its speed tests and latency tests and so forth. But still, there is a lot of turn to fiber. On the right side, from our consumer study, we've looked at people that moved in the last 2 years, either changed providers because they were unsatisfied, or they moved and they changed providers. And where the bleed was, as you can see in HFC, in areas where fiber is available, HFC lost a lot of people. And even in new customers, they didn't do as well. Fiber won in both new customers and in churn. Now, where fiber isn't available, cable is kind of holding its own in the churn, but lost a lot. But fixed wireless picked up quite a few. And the only place they were really winning is in new customers, which is a small group. There's about 9% total that churn each year, so it's not a huge number. So if you look on the left, that area where there's already fiber to cable competition, we see a slow drain of the cable folks to fiber. Now, obviously, DOCSIS 4.0 is just starting to happen. Some cable folks believe that's the holy grail, and that'll put them back in strong competition. I'm skeptical about that. I still think it'll slow it a bit, but I still think the churn will occur rapidly to fiber because of other factors, the perceptions in general of fiber as being the best. 65% of consumers think it's the best, and just the latency and reliability and other factors. So it'll be interesting to watch that. In just the last quarter, there was 265,000 internet customers lost by just the public cable companies. So interesting to watch that in the future. Next slide. So where are we going? Next slide. We're going to see that money's flowing into the market. A lot of market from private equity, money from private equity, 60 million, 80 million in the last 5 years, and that's really being dispersed as we speak. Still going on. Mergers and acquisitions, even companies from Canada coming in and buying companies, T-Mobile and so forth. That tends to add money to the pot. CapEx reinvestment, 96 million in the last. I'm going to put on my glasses here. Last few years, annually, couple of years, and which is higher than the average for the last 20 years. And of course, AT&T and Verizon have recently announced good CapEx increases for the future, so that looks exciting. Public funds, we're all aware of the public funds that have been allocated, 64 billion according to the FCC from RUS, NTIA, and Treasury, and another 42 billion plus from the BEAD program. So disbursement just starting to occur there, so a lot of excitement there. All in all, just a huge amount of capital flowing into the market. Next slide. And so we haven't set our forecast. We haven't worked on our forecast yet, but we assume that the next 5 years will be stronger than the last 5 years, as strong as the last 5 years was. We do see some caps probably coming from labor constraints. At some point, we think there's a cap of how far we can go up in annual deployment. And route miles are growing even stronger than homes passed because more rural deployment in the mix from BEAD especially, and some of these other programs is causing the feet per home passed to increase rapidly. So for people that are doing construction and cable, fiber cable and so forth, that adds to the amplification that's occurring in the next 5 years. Next slide. So here we're talking about BEAD, and of course it's going to be very significant. But as we know, there are some challenges. People talk about, our providers have talked about the fact that the low-cost option and serving all customers are a problem. We obviously want to maintain the fiber preference. And on the right side, we want to try to eliminate the 100% coverage requirement if possible. What occurs is if fiber bids come in higher than expected in some of these areas that are constrained in funding, especially the western states, they've got to balance the budget. So they're going to have to reduce the amount of fiber passings and increase the lower cost options to make the budget work. So that's a bit of a concern, but overall, BEAD is, no matter what, it's going to be very significant. And I know the policy people are looking at opportunities to even amplify the impact through getting rid of some of the constraints that some smaller providers especially are concerned about. Next slide. Features looking great. Here we're looking at feature beyond fiber to the home. We did a project recently looking at, fiber to the tower, fiber to the area, fiber to the grid, fiber to the room, fiber to the qubit, fiber in the inside vehicles, and fiber sensors. All in all, we've changed our view from being a downslide after fiber to the home is over to a continuing good, strong market for fiber for probably several decades. So future looks good for fiber and the Fiber Broadband Association as far as we can see. Next slide. And quickly get to a couple of challenges and we'll get to questions, but permitting is this year's top challenge among providers, smaller providers, permitting first, then BEAD regulations. On the larger providers, more qualitative research, they're also saying permitting, but also getting rid of copper. How do we improve the ability to decommission copper and not have to run two networks? Finally, I think we got one more slide on the cost of labor or the labor constraints. Next slide. And here we did ask smaller providers how big a constraint it is. About a quarter of them said it was a pretty big constraint. They rated a 4 or 5 in terms of a large constraint. But three-quarters did not. So it has not yet become a major constraint, but obviously it is creeping up there. And if we continue to grow with the deployment as we expect, with just private money and the BEAD money coming together, that could become a problem. And as we've all talked about, the need to try to increase workforce. So with that, Gary, I think I'll leave it back to you for any questions and go from there.
Well, Mike, first of all, your research is always great. We always love this time of year when you're able to show us the fiber deployment numbers. Tons and tons of questions. So one comes in, I get this a lot, will BEAD likely be supported by the new administration? So what's kind of your crystal ball there?
Yeah, no, I'm not the policy person there. Obviously, I may not be the right person to ask. I suspect it will. I mean, I think for one thing, the grassroots and the support for fiber is very strong. And so I'm hopeful that the administration change might take off some hard edges and some of the regulations. But again, I don't know what is possible and what will happen. I don't think that the preference will change. And even if it does, I think most state offices already have a preference to fiber. So I feel pretty good about it. But again, I'm not the policy expert.
Yeah, I mean, so our good friend Doug Adams did a nice survey with about 33 state broadband offices. And when they asked, how the new administration will impact the BEAD deployment process, the majority said, so we had about 36% would be either better or much better, 54% the same, and only about 7% said worse. So the broadband offices are very bullish, and also it looked like that they thought that the new administration would streamline things. They outlined a number of things like permitting and program changes will improve and labor availability and so forth. So at least the state broadband offices are very bullish on fiber and on change. Another question came in on the convergence. So big players are touting wireline, wireless convergence as a big strategy. I know that John Stenke talked about that a little bit on the benefits of fiber to improve convergence at AT&T, and he cited that it was over 500 basis points improvement with mobility attachments and so forth with fiber. What are you seeing?
Yeah, our consumer study ranked that a lower reason to move to fiber, but obviously it is a plus. People do like to have a single bill. We saw that back in the days of convergence of video and voice and so forth. But so I think it is an advantage. I don't think people are primarily still focused on performance of the internet itself and looking at the speeds they get and the reliability and so forth. But it is a good strategy.
All right, another really good question is, you show your 25 to 29 estimates, about 50 million homes passed coming up. So what Josh saying, hey, BEAD's about 9 million homes, which really is about 5 million. And then AT&T said another 15 million. I know they had Gigapower, 5 million. Verizon Lumen adding a little bit. We have MSOs that might stick with DOCSIS 4.0. So who's going to be doing all the other passings?
Where we're seeing the growth in the last few years is more the smaller, first of all, the mid-sized player, the people that are being infused with private equity capital, and they're all of a sudden moving from, doing 50 or 100,000 to to as much as 1 million. And then, of course, you just have a lot of small players. When you add them all up, there's a lot of these wireless WISP that are doing some fiber. There's, the RUSs that are the rural electrics building out. We'd like to see more growth of new additional electrics coming in, but there is a lot of growth out there. Still, the ILECs, the small ILECs are building out in small areas. So you just have to look at all the segments, and of course, cable itself. A lot of the cable companies, when you get below the top two, are converting to fiber, and even the top two are building fiber in greenfields and selective areas. So it all adds up, but it's less and less that the top is as strong as they are. AT&T and Verizon is still very important, but they're not the only keystone anymore.
Yeah, I didn't see you usually have a chart in your survey that shows participation, and back in the old days it was just kind of AT&T and Verizon, and now it's like cable was last year was 10% of the market, and the fastest growing segment was rural electric co-ops, and you had tier twos, tier threes, and all kinds of comers. So did you guys look at that again this year?
Yeah, I probably should add a chart maybe when we post this deck on the web. We'll add something there, but you do definitely see the growth in some of those other segments.
All right, so a good question from Jay here on when you see the annual homes pass rate, when's that going to peak and at what level, and what's limiting the rate? So we've been growing at 10% a year. We went 8.2 to 9.1 to 10.3. So where are we going to peak out, and what year is that going to happen?
Yeah, I have no scientific way to get to that. I've been assuming we're starting to see some real constraints at about 12 million, and ease up a little bit as time we add more workforce. But there's so many different constraints against workforces too. If we see a big housing boom and things like that, that could constrain workforce further. So it's all hard to say, but there's a plus and minus there. Obviously, we'd like to get to those really high build rates, but in one sense, it's not totally bad to stretch this out a little bit longer and try to make it go a little smoother. So.
And then just a clarification, someone asked, you mentioned 80 billion of CapEx. Is that U.S. only?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. And then, so Frontier's done 1.3 million passings this year. We are now at 10 million passings. Where does Frontier fit on that list of operators?
Yeah. Well, I think, I've been very impressed with what Frontier's done in turning around their situation. Originally had, pretty poor customer experience to now one of the best, and obviously they've courted Verizon and so forth. So they're very important, and I think don't recall the exact numbers that we've got plugged in for them. And again, we're just starting to look at our forecast, but they are important and they've done a great job. An example of a larger player that has really done a good job of trying to build the soft side as well as their fiber advantage to play in the market.
So labor, so one of the questions is labor is maybe the limiting factor in deployments. Do you have an estimate of how many passings per year the labor pool can support? So when, as you say, we kind of top out, I don't know, it's 12 to 14 million, something like that per year. Labor is the long pole in the tent. Is that what you're looking at, or?
I think so. I mean, we're all, there are other constraints as well. The permitting and the pole attachments and all those kinds of things are stretching things out as well. But labor is the big one that we've looked at as potential. Now, maybe it won't happen. So far it hasn't been a great limiting factor, but I still expect it's going to be the factor in later 2025, 26, and so forth.
Yeah, the broadband directors cited permitting number one. Any changes program was number two. Labor availability was number three. Supply chain 4. Tariffs, and then need for workforce development. So we should see a lot of our non-deployment funds going into workforce development. Well, Mike, we can keep going. There's just tons of great questions. You always do a fantastic job on this report. It's exciting. I think we modeled out that we would peak around 2028, but even in the out years, it would be the deployment rate would even be greater than it is today. So we should see very robust deployment through the end. I mean, everything I've seen is that we will have year-over-year growth through the end of 2030.
Yeah. Yeah. No one knows, every, geopolitical factors and everything else, economic can come into play. So you're going to have some ups and downs. We always have, but overall, I think the market is very strong for fiber. As I mentioned, I'm looking at 150 million still to build out. That's a lot of years of deployment, and adding to that other fiber opportunities for data centers and fiber to the tower and eventually fiber to the room. We've got to get to that with constraints as we get to 10 gigabits. We can't really do that with Wi-Fi anymore in its current sense. So a lot of opportunities for fiber.
Well, again, thanks, Mike. We really appreciate it. It was great seeing you last week in Florida. And, we just really appreciate the partnership over the last 22, 23 years. I hope everybody can join us next Wednesday. We're going to get together with our conference chair, Evan Freeman, the Vice President of Government and Community Relations at EPB, and our conference director, Rich Williams, principal at C2C. They're going to talk about Fiber Connect 2025. This is going to be the biggest event in our industry ever. I mean, it's going to be absolutely amazing. And they're going to give you a preview of things that we've been working on. I'm so excited. It's going to be just absolutely fantastic. So join us Christmas morning, since you don't have anything else to do on Christmas. Come listen to Fiber for Breakfast. We will see you guys next week.